Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and today we are talking about whether the Zelda team cares about the timeline. And I think this is a fun discussion to have because I care about the timeline. A lot of you watching probably care about the timeline. Not all Zelda fans, but a big part of us do. There's a reason why there are so many theories out there. There's a reason why there are so many debates. Because a big part of the Zelda fanbase cares about the story and lore and timeline of the series. But every time there's a major new game, the debates spark, conversation ensues, and many question just how much the Zelda team themselves care, because a common point that's made is that things don't always fit so well. And so some think that the Zelda team just doesn't care about the timeline. And I personally don't agree with that line of thinking entirely, but I do think there's truth in that to an extent. And so that's what I would like to talk about today. But before going forward, let me point out that we are aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Leaving a like is also super helpful, and enjoy the ride as we talk about Nintendo every day. So there have been a couple interviews with both Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaro Fujibayashi that have been doing the rounds lately about Tears of the Kingdom. And so we'll be pulling a little bit of information from both that I think will add a little bit more to this overall conversation. So firstly, let's start off with the Game Informer's interview where they were asking about the timeline. When you are developing a new Zelda title, obviously your primary focus is on core gameplay. But the timeline placement discussion has become more important and prevalent among the fans of the series. How much consideration and importance does the development team put into those discussions? Fujibayashi. As you mentioned, we realize that fans have a great time theorizing and enjoy thinking about where things fit on the timeline. That's something that the development team recognizes and it considers, but to an extent. And I say to an extent because if we get too into the weeds or too detailed in that placement, it results in kind of creating restraints for our creativity. The process of creating new ideas becomes restricted because we're so tied up in trying to make this fit into a very specific spot in the timeline. We do consider it, but not to an extent where we feel that our development process feels restricted or constrained. My takeaway from what Fujibayashi says here is that yes, the Zelda timeline does matter to the Zelda team. They do keep it in mind when they make the games. But at the same time, they're not going to be so focused on the timeline that it's going to take away from their gameplay direction. They're going to try to make it fit within their vision of whatever game they're working on. And so what's going to happen is that there will be times where not everything fits in perfectly. And me personally, I'm okay with that. Because it is The Legend of Zelda. You can interpret each game as its own thing, or a story, and when we're talking about stories or legends or myths, some details can be lost in translation over time. Not everything is meant to match up exactly, and ultimately comes down to your imagination for how they fit together. And I would say in some ways this actually enhances the Zelda experience because what happens, as they acknowledged here, is that there is a lot of conversation and theorizing within the fan base. And so when everyone kind of puts things together in their own way, people have different opinions. And that leads to discussion and debate and more theorizing, which is healthy for the community. It's healthy for the conversation about Zelda because it keeps it going. It keeps the games in the minds of gamers. And in a way, it's kind of like marketing the series. And for me personally, speculating and theorizing on what's going on within The Legend of Zelda and how the different games fit together, that's part of the experience. It makes it more fun and interesting in that way. And I like that there's not necessarily an answer. In some cases, this being one of them, I think it's better to have a question that goes unanswered as opposed to an answer that can't be questioned. What's more interesting? What's more fun? The continued pursuit and speculation for what the truth may be, and ultimately, everyone's going to come to their own personal decisions. But let's continue on here. What does Eiji Aonuma, the producer of the Zelda series, have to say about this timeline stuff? Another point kind of related to this is that as we've been able to realize more fully a real working world because of technology, you're also able to fine-tune all the details of that world. But we don't always want to do that just because we now can. Instead, as people play the game, we want to give them the ability to exist in that world and a world that they can interpret in their own way. And so, that's also something we really keep in mind as we're continuing to develop games. My interpretation of what Aonuma is saying here is that what they really prioritize is the player's experience and their ability to enjoy and interpret the world in their own way. In other words, the way the games are made, especially more recently, is for everyone to have their own personal experience, and no two experiences should be the same. And it goes beyond just how you choose to play the game, but also how you choose to interpret the world and story of the game. And if their aim is truly to do this, then there really shouldn't be a specific answer. Which actually reminds me of another recent interview, this one being with IGN, where Aonuma said something very interesting. And this was in relation to whether Link and Zelda are in a relationship. I will leave it to everyone's imagination. I don't think that Zelda is a type of game where the development team says, this is what Zelda is. This is what the story is. This is what the game is. Everything the development team wants to convey has already been placed into the game. And the rest is up to the player's imagination, and their reflection on how they feel, what they've experienced in the game. Now, this is in reference to the relationship status of Link and Zelda. And so, they talk about how the vision or ideas of the Zelda team are conveyed in the game itself, and we don't need to look outside to find that answer. And so the implication of that is that not everything is meant to be specifically answered. If there's some ambiguity, it comes down to the player to decide what they make of that. Now, personally, there are some things in Tears of the Kingdom that I think are quite blatant, such as the relationship between Link and Zelda. In my opinion, they are very clearly in a relationship, deeply in love, and they are meant to be together. For me, that's painfully obvious. But that's for me. I've spoken with other people, I've seen the opinions of others, and while there are many that are on my side, there are also quite a few others that feel differently, that just don't interpret in that way. And so, what I find so fascinating about this is that, while for me, I think it would be silly for them to not be in a relationship, depending on how someone else might feel based off their own upbringing or lifestyle or whatever they choose to believe. It just doesn't make sense to them. And the game is better for them when they think of it in that way. And it's not a wrong answer, because the way the Zelda games are made is to be molded based off how the player chooses to play and enjoy the game. Let me play you this clip from Mr. Eiji Aonuma's acceptance speech for Best Action Adventure for Tears of the Kingdom at the Game Awards.
プレイヤーの皆さんそれぞれのユニークなゲームプレイが皆さん独自のハイラルの物語となります。プレイヤーの皆さん本当にありがとうございます。
Everyone's unique approach to playing this game can become their own personal story as an adventure through the lands of Hyrule. And to all the players, you have my sincere thanks.
Thank you so much.
And right here he talks about how in Tears of the Kingdom, every player's own unique approach can become their own personal adventure. Or let's take a look at Tears of the Kingdom's website where it says, set out for adventure in a transformed and expanded Hyrule. Find new ways to explore, create, and discover on an epic journey fueled by your imagination. And that's what it's about. What the Zelda team has been working on is creating experiences that are fueled by your imagination. And what's fascinating to me about this is that when we go back to older games, where there was more left to the imagination, our journeys were in large part fueled by our imaginations. In the past, Link was more clearly a blank slate character where you could even put in your own name. Those things have changed. But the overall direction for The Legend of Zelda seems to have evolved in a way where things are now more fueled by your imagination based off what they've been able to accomplish and giving you the freedom to do things as you please. And so his philosophy translates a bit to the story and the timeline as well. I understand some people want specific, hard answers, but maybe not everyone's going to like it in that way, and so the Zelda team is trying to create an experience that appeals to everyone in their own way, because the games are fueled by your imagination. Some may feel that's a cop-out, but to me, I think it's fitting, because everyone has their own way of understanding, enjoying, and believing things. And Zelda's bigger than it ever has been before, so they must be doing something right. Going back to the main question of the video, does the Zelda team care about the timeline? Yes, they do, to an extent. Literally, that's what they've told us. There are elements put into the games that speak to these timeline ideas, but they're not going to constrain themselves in terms of their overall vision for the gameplay and structure of the game. And ultimately, this fits with what they want for Zelda, and that is for it to leave things open and ambiguous so it's up for interpretation. And you can make of it what you will. If you don't care for the timeline, then you don't need to. It's not in your face about it. But if you care to, you can look for signs and piece things together in a way that makes the most sense for you. And you're going to express your ideas to some, and they're going to give you their own ideas, and there's going to be a debate and a conversation. And so the cycle of arguing, debating about Zelda timelines will continue likely forevermore, as they have been throughout pretty much since we've been talking about Zelda theory and timelines. But those are my thoughts on the matter. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.